Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kathy Finn, president of Local 770. And we're going to wait a couple of minutes to give people a chance to join the webinar. But while we're waiting, just to say I wanted to apologize for folks who tried to get on yesterday, and we had a bunch of technical difficulties. So we want to make sure that this is working properly, and want to make sure that everyone who has questions gets an opportunity to ask their questions. So we're doing it as a Zoom webinar this time. There's a Q&A box if you have questions. You can click the little box with the question mark if you are, on the Zoom. Click the box with the question mark and you can type your question in there. You can also raise your hand if you have a question, and we will get to the questions at the end. So I'm super excited that we have a bunch of folks joining, and we want to give it a minute or so. Of course, this is the webinar regarding the Stop the Merger campaign, and to give updates of where we are based on the company putting out a bunch of information yesterday. So again, I'm Kathy Finn, president of Local 770, and actually we're joined today with Local 3000 as well. We have Sean Embley and John Marshall from Local 3000 here. They're going to give us also some important information. We have Heather Rutman, who's the communications director of Local 770, and Tom Geiger, the communications director of Local 3000. And we're joined by Grace Garcia, a member of Local 770, who has been through mergers before and is going to share her experience. So I think we'll jump right in now. I think we've given people some time to get on. Hopefully we got everybody in here. So good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Kathy Finn, president of Local 770 in California. And I want to welcome you all to our Stop the Merger member webinar. Again, I want to apologize to folks who either were on the call last night or tried to get on the call last night for the horrible technical difficulties of that call. It was frustrating for me. I'm sure it was frustrating for you. That was a system called Stone's Phones that we like to use because it calls out to our members. So we usually get more people on that way and more people involved. But yesterday it did not work as well as it normally does. And it really didn't work at all. So that was quite unfortunate. But anyway, we're thrilled that so many members are joining today to learn more about our collective efforts to stop the proposed mega merger of Kroger and Albertsons, and to learn what we can all do together to continue this fight against the merger that threatens good union jobs. And whatever the company may want you to believe, it is indeed still only a proposed merger and far from a done deal. So I know yesterday the company put out the list of divested stores, just like they have all along been trying to convince people that the merger is a done deal. Just a reminder, it is not done. As I said earlier, we have members from both Local 770 here, as well as members from Local 3000 in Washington. And they also cover parts of Oregon and Idaho. And we're coming together in solidarity because we're in this fight together, and being together is what makes us stronger. Our coalition also includes a number of other locals that were on the call yesterday. Local 7 in Colorado, Local 324 in Southern California, and Local 400 on the East Coast, as well as some other locals who are involved. But because of the technical difficulties, those locals are going to have their own webinars with their members because it was hard to get another date where everybody was available. But together, all these locals are building power to improve our wages, benefits, and working conditions, and fighting for needed improvements to staffing and safety. Our efforts are to ensure that we get the respect we deserve as workers and to better help the customers we serve every day. The purpose of today's webinar is specifically to discuss the efforts of our union to oppose the proposed mega merger of Kroger and Albertsons. So as I said yesterday, you heard that Kroger and Albertsons released a list of over 550 stores that they are proposing to divest to C&S, wholesale grocers, if the merger is allowed to proceed. And we want to assure you again that this changes nothing. The merger is not a done deal, and we continue to do everything within our power that we can do to stop it. And court cases and the FTC are still also fighting the merger alongside with us. Kroger and Albertsons have known which stores they plan to divest for months. And this is a last-ditch effort to release the list of stores in an underhanded attempt to influence the courts and create the perception that the mega merger is close to final. And this is creating more uncertainty for members like you. And again, the merger is not a done deal, far from it. The merger is being challenged by the state attorneys general in Colorado and Washington, as well as the Federal Trade Commission, and many states, including California, have joined that lawsuit. These regulators have been aware of the proposed divestiture and remain committed to their legal challenges to the merger, which kick off actually at the end of July. So these hearings are scheduled to begin soon and scheduled to run through September. Since the proposed merger was first announced in October of 2022, we have built a large and powerful opposition effort of over 100 organizations strong. Our efforts helped lead to the 3 lawsuits filed by the state and federal regulators in early 2024 to stop the merger. We also played a key role in the UFCW International Union's decision to officially oppose the merger in the spring of 2023. And people are taking notice. We have generated hundreds of TV, radio, and newspaper stories across the country, including many just yesterday. And we've held actions at many of our stores to raise awareness. We know many of you have questions about the status of the proposed merger and what is being done to stop it. Again, I want to remind you that to ask a question here on this webinar, you can put it in the chat. I see we already have some questions there that we will get to, but I want to remind folks there's sort of a square with a question mark in it, and it says Q&A under it. You can click there and type any question that you want, and we will try to get to as many as we can. In just a bit, we're going to hear from John Marshall, who's the financial analyst and capital strategist for both locals 324 and 3000. And we're also going to hear from Chief of Staff Sean Embley, who is a special advisor to the president of UFCW 3000, as well as Todd Crosby, who's here, who is works at both Local 770 and Local 3000. And as I said, and Grace Garcia, who's a 770 Vons member who went through the Hagen merger, so she's here with us today as well. And of course, we want to hear from you. So again, put your questions in the chat. We'll try to answer as many as we can. It's important to note that our fight against the proposed mega merger is one of our top priorities as a union. But members are working on important issues across the country at the same time. We are taking action to negotiate and enforce stronger contracts. We are fighting for better staffing and better safety to better serve our customers. We are doing our part to help our communities by taking care of ourselves and our family members. We are holding our elected leaders accountable for helping or hurting working families. And of course, we are always organizing to grow our membership ranks and improve working conditions for every American. I am proud to stand with you in this fight, and I thank you for your efforts. So John Marshall, to get things started, can you please explain a bit more about the proposed mega merger, what we're doing to stop it, and what members can expect to happen over the coming weeks and months?
Great. Thanks, Kathy. So just to set the stage a little bit, this proposed merger by 2 of the largest traditional grocery store chains in the United States, Kroger and Albertsons, if it were allowed, would create a monopoly or a near monopoly in many of our markets across the country. Kroger would have nearly 4,500 stores. In many cases, including in Southern California, those stores are right across the street from each other. That would result in too little competition and allow Kroger to drive up prices for consumers, close stores, leverage its power over producers, and lower workers' wages by reducing our ability to negotiate for improvements. That's why the state and federal governments have taken action to block this proposed merger. Now, I also wanted to make something else very clear. These two companies are doing very well as standalone companies. They do not need to merge to be successful. They are growing sales, making money, and posting profits. What they should be doing is investing their profits in more staffing, higher wages, lower prices, and opening more stores to increase their market shares. This proposed merger would do the opposite. It would take billions of dollars out of the grocery business and hand it over to Wall Street investors. So what's the timeline? Kathy, you mentioned it a little bit a minute ago, but right now, for the next 2 to 3 months, we're entering the final phase of this legal battle. The first hearing will begin on July 31st with the administrative law judge back in Washington, D.C., beginning to hear this case. Then, in mid-August, hearings will begin in the Colorado Attorney General's case. Then, in late August, the Federal Trade Commission's case will begin hearings in federal court in Oregon. Last but not least, the Washington State Attorney General's case will begin hearings on September 16th. So there are really 4 separate cases all playing out in the next 2 to 3 months. Nothing is decided yet. The merger has not been approved, nor has it been denied yet. We expect the rulings in these cases will come before October 9th. That is the date when the merger agreement will expire. Now, if the courts block the merger, Kroger could try to appeal those decisions, but it will have to do it in a very limited amount of time. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see what the rulings from the courts will be, but we think the government's case is very, very strong. Now, I'll turn it over to Sean Embley to moderate the Q&A.
Great. Thank you, John. Thank you, Kathy. Hello, everybody. Sean Embley with Local 3000. Happy to be here. Glad to be joined by so many members from both Local 770 and Local 3000. To start us off, I wanted to introduce Grace, who is a member at 770, and allow Grace to talk a little bit about their work in opposing the merger and their experience having gone through a merger already. Grace, do you want to introduce yourself and share a little bit about your story?
Sure. My name is Grace Garcia. I have 33 years in the grocery industry. I started with Lucky's and went on to Albertsons. And then when Albertsons merged with Vons, I was part of the Hagen crew. And then I was let go when Hagen went bankrupt 6 months later. And then I got rehired 3 months after their bankruptcy onto Vons. And I've been with Vons for the last 8 years. Personally, I don't agree with the merger because of what had happened with Hagen. Hagen had 108 stores with 106 pharmacies in their stores. I don't feel they were equipped to acquire all the other stores that they acquired, and therefore they went bankrupt 6 months later. My anger and passion for against this merger is because I went through a difficult time during those 3 months. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had to borrow money for my family, and I don't want fellow workers and members to go through what I went through during that time.
Thank you for sharing, Grace. And this is a much bigger proposed merger than what happened with Hagen. So, near 5 times as many stores, or maybe more than 5 times as many stores, are being talked about with a similarly situated company that doesn't have the infrastructure to support the stores that they are trying to purchase from Kroger, Albertsons as part of this merger. Well, we have a bunch of questions coming in on the Q&A. If you want to ask a question, just type it in the question box, and we'll make sure we do our best to get you an answer. Let's start with a question from Jessica about pharmacy floaters. So the question is, how does the status of floater pharmacists work get affected, and how do they know which company they might be a part of if the unlikely scenario happens where this merger does go through? Kathy, maybe you could take that one.
I was on mute. Okay, so yeah, that's a very interesting question, Jessica. Jessica just is actually a member of the local 770s executive board. So hi, Jessica. I think every pharmacist has a home store. My assumption would be they would go where their home store goes, if it happens. So as I think we tried to say on this call, we are fighting this merger. We believe that the FTC has a very, very good case. We are witnesses in that case, but the FTC has a really great case to stop this merger. But in the event that it does go through and CNS does get those divested stores, I believe, and I wouldn't say 100% certainty, but I believe that a floater pharmacists have a home store and they would have to go with the company that takes their home store over. Just because that's the way that it works, whatever store they're listed on is the store that they would have to go, the store that they would have to go to. And I just want to say one thing, and this actually is kind of responsive to the other one of Jessica's questions about using seniority to keep from going to CNS. So in Southern California, we do have language in our contract that, and Sean can speak to this, I don't believe they have the similar language or they don't have the exact same language in the contract in 3000, but we do have some language that allows every employee a 7-day period to decide to use their seniority to bump, to not go with the purchasing company, and to use their seniority to bump within their district under the contract provisions rather than go with the other company. Now, the thing about that is you won't know when you do that, where you will land, and you have to, wherever you land by seniority, you land. You don't know how many people are going to be doing it. And people with lower seniority, obviously, it could be risky because they don't know where they're going to land. But we did talk to the company because yesterday was the announcement, but it's not a real announcement because the merger's not done. So we did call the company yesterday, and neither the union nor the company consider yesterday's announcement to be the trigger for the 7-day period. So that will come later once there's a real announcement. This was just sort of a fake announcement, but once there's a real announcement of which stores would be divested if the merger is actually approved.
We have a couple questions on that point. In the worst case scenario, the merger is approved. What happens? Somebody's wondering, a few people are wondering, do we go on strike? Is that something that we would do as a union to protest the merger?
Well, that's also a good question. I mean, generally, while you have a contract in effect, your contract's not expired, you would not go on strike. However, most of the contracts covering these stores do expire very early in 2025. So this is an issue, and we would then have the ability to threaten a strike and go on strike once our contracts expire. So we are all working together in this coalition as well, because interestingly, all the unions in this coalition fighting the merger all have contracts with Kroger stores and Albertson stores that expire very early in 2025. So I think Colorado's are first. Theirs expire in January. And then I think it's Southern California in March. And then I think very soon thereafter, 3000 has contracts expiring. So we would then have the ability to go on strike. So that could be a strategy, part of a strategy.
And Kathy and John can correct me if I'm wrong, but we've also received no written commitment, just a verbal commitment from CNS that they would honor the contract. And that would be only a verbal commitment extending to the initial purchase, but no enforceable commitment or after the initial purchase or subsequent contracts. Is that accurate?
Yes, so we've gotten a lot of things, we've gotten a lot of words, you know, a lot of nice sounding words from Kroger about how great this is gonna be and how CNS has this commitment to operate 100% of the stores for at least 2 years and how they're gonna do, but we've gotten nothing in writing. And in fact, when we asked CNS about that 2-year commitment, they were like, "Oh, really? Who said that? We never said we would, you know, keep the stores open for 2 years." And, you know, we've received nothing in writing, no signed agreement. I mean, even in the Hagen situation, Hagen met with us and there was a signed agreement in advance to, you know, to honor the contracts. We haven't gotten that from CNS yet.
Thank you, Kathy. A couple questions coming in here. We have one from Judith, who's new to the grocery industry and a new member. So welcome, Judith. Happy to have you be a member. They are wondering that they say they're hearing that we're saying, hey, this isn't close to final. Will the decision be made after all the court cases are completed? Or what happens if some cases are successful to stop the merger, but not others? So for example, what happens if the Colorado AG is successful in their court case, but the Washington AG loses their court case? What does that look like? And maybe John, you could take that.
Sure, that's a really great question, Judith. So the thing to keep in mind about the different court cases is 2 of them, the ones that Sean just mentioned, Washington State and the state of Colorado, those are state court cases, and their attorney generals have the ability to enforce their state laws over what happens in their states. And so if those cases are successful, they will block the merger from occurring in their states. Now, there's a bigger question then about, well, if you can't do the merger in Washington and or Colorado, can somehow the rest of the merger take place? I think the answer to that question is no. It would be very, very difficult for Kroger and Albertsons to try and do the merger without those 2 states as part of it, because those are big states that have a significant number of stores from both companies in each of them. Now, if the federal case, if the FTC wins its case in Oregon, that's, I think, the end of the entire merger, because they have jurisdiction over the entire country's antitrust laws. And so really that's, you could say it's the most significant case of them all, because even if in Colorado and Washington, the companies were successful in beating those lawsuits in those states, if the FTC wins in federal court, the entire merger is blocked.
Thank you, John. Maybe a follow-up question to that. Somebody is asking, you know, I don't understand, if this merger goes through, why is it not considered a monopoly? Isn't that what the FTC is supposed to do, is to stop monopolies from forming? Maybe you could talk a little bit about the market share that a fully merged Albertsons and Kroger company would have, and the impact that could have on labor, customers, and suppliers, which I think is really interesting as we've done this work, how much power these 2 companies currently have over the supply chain and how much more power a merged Kroger-Albertsons company would gain.
Yeah, no, that's another great question. And I can sort of talk about the impact on the sort of consumer market, and maybe Kathy wants to weigh in terms of what that would mean at the negotiating table. But, you know, Kroger and Albertsons, in advocating for this merger, have talked about their national market shares. And they said, oh, we've only got 12% or 10%. It's not enough to be dominant. You know, we're a small player nationally. But the reality is, and they know this, people don't buy groceries nationally. They buy groceries locally. And in local markets, like in Seattle, like in the state of Washington, like in Southern California, there's a tremendous concentration of Kroger stores and Albertsons stores. They are the 2 leading traditional one-stop shop grocers. That's where you can go to get everything on your shopping list. There are other places you can get some produce. You can get some chips and some soda at Walgreens. You can get food other places. But if you want to do your whole shop, there's very few stores that you can go in those places that compete with Kroger and Albertsons. And the FTC is very clear in their complaints defining the market, the supermarket, and it does include Walmart supercenters, and other competitors are part of that mix. But if you look at the market shares, Kroger would have a dominant market share in those local markets. They would be able to close stores. They would be able to raise prices. They would be able to continue understaffing the stores and make longer lines and poorer customer service, just part of the regular day-to-day in those stores without fear of losing customers. And that's the problem from a consumer perspective. But maybe Kathy wants to weigh in terms of the negotiations.
Yeah, so the FTC is actually making some novel arguments very powerfully to fight this merger. So in addition to the monopolistic power that Kroger is going to have over consumers, they're also going to be having a monopoly power over workers. Because when we go to the bargaining table currently, and this is true in Washington and Southern California, we bargain with multiple employers, but only two of them really have national bargaining power, and that's obviously Kroger and Albertsons. But we are able to, and for those members who were, in the bargaining last time, we actually in some ways play those two companies off against each other in bargaining, because we can try to reach an agreement with one company and threaten to strike the other company. If we only had one company to bargain with, if this merger went through and we only had one company to bargain with, in addition to all the risks of all the store closures and the members losing their jobs and all the horrible things that happened in the Hagen situation, we also are going to be in a situation where we're only going to have one company to bargain with. And if we had to, if we weren't happy with the proposal that they offered, we could strike them, but it would mean, striking all the stores. We would have no other, competitor to send people to. We would have no other company working, having members working at the time. So it really diminishes our power at the bargaining table. And this has happened over time. It used to be, people who've been around a long time remember, there was a long time, there was the big three, Vons, Albertsons, and Ralph's. But before that, we had negotiations where there were 10 companies. There was, at least in Southern California anyway, there was Boys Markets and Market Basket and Lucky's and Hughes Markets. And in those days, we were able to get, better settlements because each company as an individual didn't have as much market power. And so as mergers happened, at one point when it was the big three, they decided to try to take us on in 03, 04, and we ended up in a big strike. And those things are all as a result of mergers.
Thank you, both John and Kathy, for that. Grace, you have a question or a comment?
Yeah. As a member, I just wanted to ask Kathy, in the past, how willing is Kroger to negotiate contracts with our union?
That is a great question, Grace. So I will say, in my experience, and I've been negotiating contracts for 27 years, Kroger has generally been the most difficult of companies to get, a good contract from. So we've had to put the pressure on them. And at least in the last 2 rounds of bargaining in Southern California, we ultimately were able to get a deal with Albertsons. And then by threatening to, strike Ralph's, we were able to push Ralph's to agree to the same contract that Albertsons agreed to. So if all we had was Kroger, we would be dealing with the most difficult company only, and we wouldn't have any other company to help put pressure on them.
And the exact
Thank you,
same
Kathy.
scenario is true for Local 3000. in multiple regards. We used to bargain with many grocery employers. Now we bargain really with the big two, Albertsons and Kroger. We already think there's too much consolidation in the industry. And the last couple bargaining cycles for us, we reached an agreement with Albertsons Safeway first and used that agreement to leverage Kroger to meet the agreement that we had reached with Albertsons and Safeway. So they are also our most difficult employer that we have to deal with on the bargaining front as well. I got a couple questions in the chat about layoffs if the merger were to go through and CNS was to take over the divested stores. And then just a question generally, like, what does divestment mean? So Kathy, maybe you could talk a little bit about effects bargains and what could happen if the worst case scenario plays out, and then just a little bit on divestment and what that term actually means.
Yeah, so I'll do the divestiture, what that means first. So in order to try to and this happens in mergers a lot. So as John Marshall was talking about the monopoly power that will come from, you know, the merger of Kroger and Albertsons, and how they have stores right across the street from each other in many places or right down the block. In order to try to allay the fears or try to say, hey, this merger is not going to be so bad, Kroger is making this offer that they will sell stores in areas where their monopoly power is too great. If the merger were approved, their monopoly power would be so great, even they admit that in order to reduce that monopoly power, they need to get rid of some stores. So they have found 550 places where even they basically admit that they would have too much of a monopoly if they got all the stores. So instead, they are making this offer to sell 550 stores at way below market value to this other company that's going to come in and is claiming that they're going to operate them. The weakness in the argument is that they are getting like basically a bargain basement deal on these 550 stores. They're paying less than what the property value of the stores is worth. So whether the stores are successful or not, CNS is going to make money. So they don't have to have successful stores. And Hagen and the private equity company Comvest that owned Hagen made millions of dollars, billions of dollars probably, off the Hagen debacle. Even though the stores never made a penny of profit, they made money by selling off the property that the stores were on because it was very valuable property and they got it for a steal. So the same thing is happening here. That's what divestiture is selling off stores to make your deal less monopolistic. But it doesn't really work if the stores don't stay open. But obviously to Kroger, they don't care if the stores stay open or not, because they would actually prefer that they close, because then they do have more monopoly power. And that's one of the big reasons why the FTC is really super concerned about this particular situation, because it looks like they're just using the exact same playbook that Albertsons used in the Hagen merger. Then going to the thing about layoffs. So if everything turned out the way they're saying that it will, CNS would come in, they would take all the workers, they would respect the contracts, they would operate great, and nobody would get laid off. But what happened in the Hagen situation, which is what we fear is going to happen here, is that CNS does not have a plan to operate these stores and doesn't have the ability to operate the stores. And those people that went to CNS, ultimately those stores would close. And as it happened in Hagen, 100% of those people ultimately got laid off. And I think it was thousands of members. I think it was 8,000 in Southern California. I don't know the number in local 3,000 that got laid off during the Hagen thing. I don't think it was quite as bad there, because some of their Hagen stores stayed open, I think. But anyway, we had thousands and thousands and thousands of members laid off. So it was a really horrible situation. And that's what we're trying to avoid here. And then the other thing that Sean was talking about is we will have at some point, if the merger does get approved, an opportunity to do what's called effects bargaining, which is bargaining over any impacts. So We could bargain severance packages if something were to happen, or we could bargain the ability to use your seniority to go back to a Kroger store or your former store if you had the seniority to do so, if your CNS closed. We don't have those things in the bag. Those are things we could propose in effects bargaining. There are things that we would propose. And then, as we already mentioned, is it's just sort of lines up that not only will we be having effects bargaining, we'll be having actual bargaining right around the same time, potentially, that this goes through. If it does go through, we're still, doing everything we can to stop it, of course.
And I think one example, at least in Local 3000's jurisdiction, of how imbalanced the companies would be if the merger was successful. We right now represent about 25,000 workers at both Safeway and Albertsons, relatively evenly split, about 11,000 Kroger workers, about 14,000 Albertsons workers. Under their plan, that would shift to become about 21,000 Kroger workers under the new merged company and just 4,000 CNS workers. So it's a very imbalanced power dynamic when you actually look at their proposal, what is supposed to be a proposal to address the concerns of regional monopolies, doesn't come close. I have a question here, maybe just a question about who are the members of FTC. Maybe, John, you could speak a little bit about the agency, the Federal Trade Commission, why they have jurisdiction, who encompasses that agency.
Yeah, it's actually a really important question. So the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, is a presidential body. The appointments are federal, and it is currently chaired by Lina Khan. And Lina Khan is a real champion for consumers and a champion for workers. And she has had some real criticisms of the way antitrust enforcement has been conducted for the last 40 years or so. In fact, one of the things that she was very critical of years ago was the Hagen divestiture in 2015. She has pointed to that repeatedly as an example of how the Federal Trade Commission didn't do its job. And that's one of the reasons why we're very confident that the Federal Trade Commission is fighting for our interests in this case. They learned their lesson from the mistake of 2015 and the mistake of the Hagen disaster. And what is being proposed now is, in fact, very similar, to divest an even greater number of stores to an out-of-state wholesaler, CNS Wholesale Grocers, that has no stores in California, has no stores in Washington, currently operates a grand total of 23 stores in the Midwest and the East Coast, and one single pharmacy. They have no experience operating a retail chain of this size, and we think that they would fail in the same way that Hagen failed. And again, we're confident that the FTC is aware of that in a very acute way. So currently, the makeup of the FTC is of the commission is 3 Democrats and 2 Republicans. So one of the important things to understand is when the administrative law judge within the FTC comes to the decision, that decision has to be approved by a majority of the FTC. And so again, currently we have a Democratic majority, 3-2, on the FTC commission itself. And those people, those Democrats in the majority, are advocates for consumers and workers, and we're confident that they would do the right thing in this situation.
Oh, and we actually went to DC and met with them all. So the ones that are the Democrats that are pushing our issues, that are helping us push the issue of, protecting the workers and consumers in this particular case, they took the time to meet with us, as did Lina Khan on several occasions. So we've had the opportunity to actually speak with them. They wanted to ask us questions and get our input before they made their decision.
Excellent. Thank you, Kathy and John. And we had a question about who is CNS. I think, John, you covered that. So hopefully people have a better idea of what this company is that is trying to purchase these stores. Also had a couple questions about, hey, what can I do? I'm a worker in the store. I'm opposed to this merger. What can I do? Right now, we're really in the phase of the campaign where we need to make sure that we're getting accurate information out, because the companies are trying to muddy the water. And we believe that's one of the reasons they released this list yesterday of the proposed divested stores, a list that they've likely had from the very early goings when they were talking to CNS about this deal, and a list that the FTC probably has had for months as well. There's nothing new about the list. What is likely their tactic is to make it seem like this merger is already a done deal, that it's going to happen, so people stop fighting. So the thing that you all can do as workers in the worksite is to go back and make sure that we're getting accurate information to your coworkers, to your customers, and your friends and family. And if you want to get updates as this process is moving along, you can go to the stopthemerger.com website. You can see John Marshall has it prominently on his Zoom background, and that will give you the quickest updates to news and information. We also had a question, I'll kick this to you, Kathy, about as the court proceedings are happening, how am I going to get information? Are the local unions going to be sending out information? What does that look like?
Oh, yeah, as we have been, I think all locals will be sending when there is some relevant information, we'll be sending texts as we have been. Also, the Stop the Merger website will continue to be updated as to what's happening. You know, as generally as a court case goes, you know, I don't know if it's going to be public or not yet. I think the judge probably has to decide that. So it may not, we may not know from day to day what's happening in court, but if we can report what it is, but you just never know until the end. You know, what the judge is going to decide.
I just want to add one thing there, Sean, just to clarify, the exact website is nogrosrymerger.com.
Thanks, John. It's not Stop the Merger. It's nogrosrymerger.com. Great. And then also we wanted to make sure that folks recognize the hard work of you and your coworkers in California and Washington over the last year to pass local state legislation that helps protect workers from this exact scenario where if they're laid off, they'll have extra layers of protection. We also have our collective bargaining agreement that we can utilize to protect ourselves too, and gives us the right to go into effects bargain and different things like that. I see we have a couple more questions going on. So one more coming in on the FTC. Can the presidential race have an impact on the FTC ruling?
I mean, I believe that it can. I'm not sure what their terms are and when their terms expire, but FTC chair and board members are appointed by the president. And I'm just not sure, maybe John knows, do they get to continue till their term expires even when a new president comes?
They do, and new appointees would have to be approved by I believe the Senate or the House. And so it would be a lengthy process, even if the current administration were not to be reelected and the Republicans would take the White House, there would be a lag in terms of time. So I think this particular merger, again, the expiration on the merger agreement is October 9th. And so really a month before the election, there's going to be a decision, at least a month before the election, there's going to be a decision. And so I think we're going to be in the current makeup of the FTC as it is will decide this case. But as for the next case, we need to keep that Democratic majority.
There was one question from a member, well, one of my members, Rafael Bahena, who said he heard that his store that's currently a Vons will become a Ralph's. And he's asking, will he still be able to stay with Vons? And I think that I'm, I don't know which stores. There's the banner of the store, and then there's who owns the store, which is different. So Kroger, once the merger goes through, Kroger is going to own the Vons name, and will continue to own the Ralph's name and the Food for Less name. In Southern California, they would be giving to CNS the Albertsons name. I'm not sure if that's also true in Washington. It may not be, but so the names of stores may change. So if your store is not a divested store, your store will be owned by Kroger, but what it will be called it may be called Vons, it may be called Ralph's, it may be called something else, but if your store is not divested, whether you're working at a Vons store or a Ralph's store, your store will be owned by the Kroger company. Did that make sense?
I think so. Getting another question here about what is inaccurate in what the companies are telling us about the merger. What is inaccurate in our opinion about their talking points?
Well, we probably don't have enough time on this webinar to go through every single one of the falsehoods, but essentially, Kroger has stated that they're going to lower prices. If you actually look at the amount that they claim they're going to lower prices by, it's less than 0.5% of their current sales. So it's not enough that anybody would notice. Most people understand it's much more likely that they're going to raise prices, reduce services, close stores. That's what has happened in the past with mergers like this. And clearly, that's what Wall Street thinks would be the opportunity for Kroger if they were successful in this merger. They have made claims, again, investing $1 billion in wages. It's kind of, I guess, a coincidence. They just happened to land on that exact number, $1 billion, which is somehow what they calculated. As Kathy just explained, it's very difficult to get Kroger to increase wages at the bargaining table. If they wanted to invest in wages, they could do that at any time. I know at Local 3000, we just negotiated with them in the last couple of months. It was very difficult to get them to invest in wages. Those are really PR talking points that they have cited. Again, they've also cited those national market share figures, talking about competition from Walmart, competition from Amazon. And it's true, if you look at Walmart, they're a big national player, but they're a dominant player in many places where Kroger isn't, or Albertsons isn't. If you look at the core competition in a lot of the markets, Walmart may be there, but they don't have the huge market share in many of our markets, particularly on the West Coast, where this merger would have a huge impact and give huge power to Kroger. A number of falsehoods have been made about CNS wholesale grocers. Kroger keeps on talking about them as though they are a huge, strong financial company. The reality is their sales have been declining dramatically over the last 5 years. 20% reduction in sales during a period when food prices were going up. So on a volume basis, their volume has been declining by 40% over the last 5 years. They are in debt. Their bonds are rated junk bonds, below investment grade status. This is not a company that is strong financially. Despite this, Kroger continues to go around and make these claims. Again, I could go on and on with the falsehoods that Kroger has been putting out there. I think, fortunately, the attorney generals in the various states around the country and the Federal Trade Commission are not buying it.
Thank you, John. Had another question about the proposed divestitures. Are we only divesting? Are they only proposing to divest Albertson stores, or are any Kroger stores being divested? I know in Washington State, their proposal is to divest almost an entire banner of Kroger, QFC, which is really based in the Puget Sound. But the majority of the stores are Albertsons banner stores. How does the makeup look in Southern California? Is it only Albertsons stores that are being divested, or do we have? Yeah.
Only Albertsons stores or stores owned by Albertsons, which includes Albertsons and Vons. But yes, those are so when we did not know this until yesterday, although we've been asking for 20 months for this information. We didn't see that information until pretty much everybody else does that. In Southern California, only Albertsons owned stores are being divested, no Ralph's. So we're getting to the end. So this webinar has been recorded. We're going to share it with folks. Please let people know if you found it informative. Let people know that you know, they can watch it. I guess is it going to be posted on the No Grocery Merger website as well as our local union websites? Oh, it's not going to be posted anywhere publicly. I was just informed. We'll send it to people via text. We'll send them a link that they can watch. We're not going to post it anywhere publicly, but you will get a text that you can watch it. And so let your coworkers know that they should watch it. If we didn't get to your question, because late in the game, a whole lot of questions rolled in and there's just no way we can get to all of them. There's just all of a sudden a whole lot of questions came in. So we're not going to get to all of them, but we will get at we'll get your names and we'll get back to you. Somebody will contact you. We'll get the pending questions. We can pull them together. And I just want to say it's great to see you know, hundreds of folks you know, on this call, and the power that the workers have, and that the union has, you know, standing in solidarity with our local 3000 and the other locals across the country. You know, I'm confident that we're going to win. You know, it's going to ultimately be up to a judge. I think we've done everything to make the strongest case possible, working with the FTC. So confident we're going to win. And we'll keep you informed all along. And you know, even if the merger does go through, we'll of course do everything we can, even at that point, to protect folks's jobs. You want to say anything in the end, Sean, as well, or Todd or John? We're good.
We're good. Thank you for joining. Have a great evening.
Bye, everybody.